The door that shouldn't be opened. Chapter 1. The house at the edge of town. The house had always been there, standing silently at the edge of the town, its grey stones weathered by years and its roof sagging like a tired old man. Nobody remembered who built it or when. Children dared each other to step onto its creaking porch, but none stayed long enough to venture inside. The adults whispered tales of misfortune tied to the house, and over time it simply became a part of the landscape, a looming shadow no one dared to acknowledge. I moved to Runwood in the fall of 1998, seeking a quiet place to escape the chaos of my life in the city. My divorce had left me hollow, and the idea of a small town with kind neighbors and slower days seemed like a balm for my frayed nerves. I rented a modest home on the other side of town and quickly found work at the local library. It wasn't long before I heard about the house. "It's cursed," Mrs. Hastings, the elderly librarian, told me one rainy afternoon. She was a woman of brittle bones and sharp words, her hands always busy sorting books or knitting scarves. "People who go inside don't come out the same." I smiled politely, thinking it was just small town superstition. "What happened there?" I asked, more out of curiosity than genuine interest. Mrs. Hastings hesitated, her knitting needles pausing mid-stitch. "It's not the house itself," she said finally. "It's the door." "The door?" She nodded. "In the basement. They say it's not meant to be opened. That's where the trouble starts." The way she said it sent a shiver down my spine, but I brushed it off. Every town had its ghost stories, and Wrenwood was no different. Little did I know that this story was far from ordinary. Chapter 2. A Dare Gone Wrong. It began with a dare. One Friday night, I found myself at a local pub with a group of co-workers. The conversation drifted to the house, as it often did. A man named Greg, who worked at the hardware store, claimed he'd once stepped inside as a teenager. "The air felt heavy," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "like something was watching me. I didn't go past the foyer, got out of there as fast as I could." "So, you chickened out," teased Diane, the town's florist. She had a knack for turning even the most serious topics into light-hearted banter. Typical Greg. "Why don't you try it then?" he shot back, a defensive edge in his tone. The challenge hung in the air. Diane's smirk faltered, but before she could respond, I surprised myself by speaking up. "I'll do it," I said. The words felt foreign on my tongue. Maybe it was the beer, or maybe it was the lingering ache of wanting to prove something to myself after the wreckage of my marriage. Either way, the room fell silent as everyone turned to look at me. "You're serious?" Greg asked, his eyebrows raised. "Why not?" I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. "It's just an old house." Diane's laughter broke the tension. "You've got guts, I'll give you that." She raised her glass in a mock toast. "Good luck, you'll need it." Chapter 3. Crossing the Threshold. The next morning, with a mix of determination and dread, I found myself standing on the porch of the house. The autumn wind bit at my skin, carrying with it the scent of decaying leaves. The house loomed above me, its windows like empty eyes staring into my soul. I hesitated, hand hovering over the rusted doorknob. "Just an old house," I muttered to myself, as if saying it aloud would make it true. Taking a deep breath, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of mildew and something faintly metallic. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight as I stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight streaming through the cracked windows. The silence was deafening. The first floor was unremarkable, filled with the remnants of a life long forgotten: a moth-eaten armchair, a shattered mirror, a dining table missing one leg. I felt a strange pull, an inexplicable urge to go deeper into the house. That's when I found the door. Chapter 4. The door. It was in the basement, just as Mrs. Hastings had said. The stairs groaned under my weight as I descended, my flashlight casting long, trembling shadows on the stone walls. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones. And there it was. The door was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was made of dark, polished wood, its surface engraved with intricate symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when I looked at them too long. There was no handle, only a circular indentation in the center, as if it was waiting for something or someone to unlock it. A sense of unease washed over me, stronger than anything I'd felt before. My instinct screamed at me to leave, to turn around and never look back. But curiosity is a powerful thing. Against my better judgment, I reached out and pressed my palm into the indentation. The symbols glowed faintly and the door began to hum, a low, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through my very soul. Then, with a deafening creak, it began to open. Chapter 5: What Lies Beyond. The darkness beyond the door was absolute, a void that seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw shapes emerging from the shadows, twisted, unnatural shapes that defied logic and reason. The air grew colder, and a deep, guttural sound echoed from the depths. "Leave," a voice whispered, low and malevolent. It came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating in my chest like the toll of a funeral bell. I stumbled back, my heart pounding, but before I could run, something moved in the darkness. A figure emerged, tall and gaunt, its skin stretched tight over jagged bones. Its eyes burned like coals, and its mouth twisted into a grin that chilled me to my core. "You shouldn't have opened the door," it said, its voice dripping with malice. Chapter 6: The Escape. Panic overtook me. I turned and bolted up the stairs, my flashlight clattering to the ground behind me. The house seemed to come alive, the walls groaning and the floorboards buckling under my feet. The door to the basement slammed shut with a thunderous bang, but I didn't stop. I ran out of the house, not daring to look back. When I finally reached the safety of my car, I realized I was trembling uncontrollably. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. Chapter 7: The Aftermath. The days that followed were a blur of nightmares and paranoia. I'd wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced I could hear whispers in the darkness. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and I constantly felt like I was being watched. Then the disappearances began. People in town started vanishing without a trace. First Greg, then Diane. Each time I felt a deep, gnawing guilt. I'd opened the door. I'd unleashed something terrible. Chapter 8: The Final Stand. I knew I had to go back. The house was the source of whatever was happening, and it was my responsibility to stop it. Armed with a flashlight, a crowbar, and a trembling resolve, I returned to the house one final time. The basement door was waiting for me, as if it had been expecting my return. Taking a deep breath, I descended the stairs and stepped through the door once more. The void was as terrifying as I remembered, but this time I was ready. I'd spent days researching the symbols, learning the ancient language they represented. With trembling hands, I began to chant the words I'd memorized, hoping they would seal the door and banish whatever lay beyond. The figure appeared again, its fiery eyes narrowing in anger. "You cannot undo what you have done," it hissed. "Watch me," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The chanting grew louder, the symbols on the door glowing brighter. The figure screamed, a sound that pierced my ears and filled me with unbearable pain. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. With a final, blinding flash of light, the door slammed shut, and the void disappeared. Chapter 9: The Quiet Aftermath. The house burned to the ground that night. No one knew how it started, but I didn't care. All that mattered was that it was over. The disappearances stopped, and the town slowly returned to normal. As for me, I moved away from Renwood, leaving the nightmares behind. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear the whispers, and I can't help but wonder if the door is truly closed for good.